So the Pew Research Center recently put out a study that showed that more Latinx students are graduating high school and being admitted to college. So that should be a good thing, right? Hi, I'm Ruben, but you might know me as Chicano Chisme. And now that Hispanic Heritage Month is over, we can talk about the real issues. Like the Hispanic Serving Institution, which is a part of a federal law, the Higher Education Opportunity Act, specifically Title V, which tries to encourage schools to enroll more Hispanic students, 25% of their population to be exact, which should seem like a nice thing, right? As Latinx has become one of the biggest marginalized group in the US, there should be resources funneled into ensuring that they have access to a good education. But as good as a Hispanic Serving Institution might seem, it comes with a lot of problems. One of the big parts of this problem is that it's just a grant, meaning it can be taken away at any time. Schools need a permanent and fully funded solution to helping marginalized students, not just a grant that they have to meet by enrolling a lot of students into their school, which by the way also is part of the problem of like homelessness near college campuses, right? Schools that are like bringing in a bunch of students but don't have not only resources on campus but resources off campus to help them survive and graduate. Schools shouldn't really rely on these types of grants, especially given that like students are already paying like ridiculous tuition for their administrators to cater to them, right? And to serve them, because at the end of the day, that's what our tuition is supposed to go towards, so that administrators and teachers can help Latinx students and marginalized students in general actually graduate. A lot of the tuition money is going to other programs that don't really need help, like your football team and things like, I don't know, your administrators pocketing money all the time. See, and that's what brings up another problem. There's nothing ensuring that HSI, which is the short way of saying Hispanic Serving Institution, that money from that grant actually goes to serve Latinx students, which can lead to some shady things, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to understand that colleges are still selling a product and they still function in a way that makes them see like a bottom line, right? So everything that colleges do is essentially for a profit. A part of them looking at grants is them saying like, okay, so how much money can like their system profit? And that kind of shows like the underbelly of this thing, right? Which is like they're increasing their diversity, but they're doing it for money, not with the student's best interest in mind. Because if it was the student's best interest in mind, then they wouldn't be looking towards grants that have certain criteria, right, that they have to meet in order to get that money. And so if they cared, right, they shouldn't have to wait for these grants that after they get them require that students essentially bust their butts to like ensure that this money is going to stuff that helps them. And that's another big problem, not only when it comes to HSI, but also to like programs and colleges in general. They require so much student labor, so much student activism, that it's like, what the heck are you investing our tuition for if you're not here to serve students? And so this also brings us into like how schools are not serving Latinx students. Even though high school graduation rates for Latinx students is at an all-time high, and relatedly, so is their college enrollment. However, their college graduation rates are still lagging behind every other group. And that's a lot because there's rarely cultural competency in our campuses, right? So Latinx students show up, happy and bright because the campus decided that it wanted to increase Latinx student presence. But once they get there, they get to a campus that doesn't know how to accommodate them, doesn't know the cultural barriers, inundates them with debt, doesn't have, the adequate, mental health resources, doesn't have competent professors that know how to speak to Latinx students. There's like rarely any racial sensitivity and such. And that again goes with the cultural competency. You're just throwing a lot of students into like this pit of like despair in a lot of cases, right? And so what that leads to is that because students who are marginalized don't feel, great on campus, they drop out or they don't finish four-year programs. And that's a key part of this. So historically, Latinx students have mainly gone to two-year programs and they do fairly well there. So community colleges have some of the highest graduation rates for Latinx students. But it is when we go to these four-year institutions where things just kind of go down the drain because, again, schools really don't care about our graduation rate. They just care about money. So even though these schools are still getting all this funding because they are bringing in, hordes of Latinxes, it isn't ensuring that we're graduating. So where is this money going? And how can they do better? And part of that is installing permanent programs, like I mentioned before, and programs that predict the necessities of students, not things that are reaction to student activism, because student activism is great, but it also requires a lot of work from students who should just be focusing on their work, which also plays into why marginalized students don't graduate. And I know this is gonna seem bleak, but when we spend so much time advocating to even have space and even have resources on our campuses, that takes away time from our actual studying and our actual coursework. Schools have to take that in mind. And that also brings me to another problematic point of the Hispanic Serving Institution. Problematic use of Hispanic aside. It isn't very clear on what counts as Hispanic, but it only takes into consideration that we check in the Hispanic box, which leaves it open to a lot of things. So there's been, accounts of white students who check off Hispanic because it just means Spanish speaking, which a lot of folks who are not Latinx are. And it also makes space for a lot of international students who a lot of schools are taking in more of because they pay higher tuition. So they're taking advantage of rich international students who might be Hispanic or might fall under Hispanic label and crossing off multiple things at once, right? Not only do they get more tuition money, but then they actually meet their quota for the Hispanic Serving Institution grant, right? So they're just piling on things to meet this quota and to essentially make a dime at the end of the day. And again, I'm not saying that more Latinx students on a college campus is bad. It's good that we're getting an education and that schools are trying harder to get us there. But there's a difference between getting us there and keeping us there in a way that ensures our success. The first step is getting us there, and the second one is to ensure that we succeed. Schools should be starting to look beyond this, and again, shouldn't rely on the labor of students to get off their butts and start acting on this and start ensuring that their HSI money is going towards a greater good, which is the graduation rate of Latinx students. But again, HSI and programs like it are just a band-aid on a violent system that was never really meant for marginalized people. The university, as we know it in the United States, wasn't built with marginalized people in mind. I mean, a lot of them only started admitting us in the last 60 years or so, with pushes for diversity programs and programs that help marginalized people only being as new as the last 30 years. The real solution would be really to abolish the ivory tower that is academia and to abolish the gatekeeping of knowledge, which is what these institutions are. They're saying you're worthy of getting this education and having access to this knowledge. It's saying it's separating people by arbitrary notions of intellect, right, and worthiness. And even then it's not always intellect, because there's a lot of legacy students that get into elite schools. So as we fight to ensure that universities center marginalized students and provide for them, we should also be looking at ways to make education more equitable, which is to make education more accessible. But I know that a lot of folks aren't down for abolishing the systems, especially those of us who need them to survive. Personally, if it wasn't for, student grants and student loans, it would have been really hard for me to survive the ever-growing threat of homelessness. And for a lot of us, academia offers us an opportunity for personal improvement as well as community improvement. And that's important, community. And isn't that the reason we are going to college in the first place? I'd like to thank all my patrons, especially Danielle G, Chris N, and Danielle V. Without all my patron support, none of my online work would be possible. So if you'd like to support this channel and get longer videos and other dope rewards like scripts and live streams, you can support me at patreon.com/queerchicanochisme.